it seems to be showing. Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Florian. I'm from University of Newcastle. You'll see there's a QR code on the screen. If you're quick, you can scan it, and it'll send you to an online page where you can actually try out the Squid question creator thingy. I'll put it up again at the end of my talk. But I first want to introduce what this is about. So Squid, this is Australia. So of course the word Squid started out as an acronym. It stands for Sage Quiz Developer. And that's because I initially wrote it in Sage, which is really just an add-on to Python. It's a free computer algebra system that I really like using. All right, so we've talked a lot about this, especially Don's talk this morning. The problems with assessments these days at university is, well, primarily its integrity. I'm very happy to see that there've been a whole lot of newspaper articles recently pointing out how much contract cheating is going on and so on. And just maybe that'll convince a few more of the university higher ups to move away from uninvigilated online stuff. Other problems, of course, include the workload that we've been facing with all these changes and the formats we're supposed to work with. And also when the workload's high, then the quality of assessments can suffer as well. So the big question is always, how do we do the assessments? Is it going to be online or face-to-face? So I've interviewed a whole lot of people about this. The reason for that is I'm currently participating in the Cyber on Prime project, which is a program that's supposed to teach me how to turn ideas and research into impact. And the primary tool is what they call customer conversation. So today I interviewed 2 people here in the audience already, just as an example. But when I interview university lecturers, there's always this. I've heard a little bit about what's been going on at the various universities. There's always this issue about, is it now going to be online? Is it going to be face to face? So the online, we've really this has been discussed ad nauseum now already. But with the online assessments, there's really been a huge integrity issue. Students copying from each other, or contract cheating, or just using Wolfram Alpha to solve the problems for them. Various people have tried online invigilation methods like Zoom, having a Zoom camera view on all the time, or there's lockdown browsers, or there's this remote proctoring stuff. None of it really works well. For example, you're trying to vigilate an exam over Zoom. The student says, "I'm sorry, I have to go to the toilet," and goes away for 10 minutes. What do? Right? What do you know? You have no idea what they're doing in those 10 minutes. But are you really now going to fail them? Seriously? No, you won't. So it doesn't work. At our university, vivas have been a big thing. So we've been threatening students that we will interview them after the exam to find out if they really did what they did. But the threat is really very empty, because if there's a brazen liar, there's nothing we can do about that, right? And it's just super stressful. Students hate it. It hasn't caught any cheating. I'm not supposed to say that, it's actually confidential. But yeah, it doesn't work, right? Other people I've spoken to talk about how they craft Wolfram Alpha proof questions or Google proof questions. So we've actually had that mentioned today. And this is actually a really good exercise. It's really awesome to craft questions like this. But sometimes in a first-year mathematics course, you do want to check that the students can differentiate a function, right? And almost any question you can ask about differentiate, but where you want to check whether or not they can differentiate a function is a question that Wolfram Alpha can solve for them. So you can really only part of your assessment can be made Wolfram Alpha proof. And also it takes a huge amount of effort to craft these. And there are these really cool tools like Mobius and Numbers. There's some numbers experts here, which can programmatically create question variants. And this is a pretty cool tool. Numbers, I've discovered, has a disadvantage that everything runs in your browser. So the student is tech savvy enough, they can hack it and just get Numbers to report back that you got everything right. Mobius I haven't tried out. Our university doesn't have Moodle, so I haven't tried Mobius yet. But yeah, there's another issue, of course, with things like Numbers and Mobius, where you programmatically create questions on the fly, and that is in a formative assessment, that's perfectly fine. It's brilliant. The students just keep doing these things until they've gotten it. But for an actual end-of-year high-stakes exam or something, you can have the problem that one student might get an easy variant, another student might get a hard variant, and if you want to prevent that happening, you're going to put in a huge amount of effort into coding these questions. Okay, so online, it's not a great thing. It's not our choice, obviously, but it's usually the higher ups that dictate it. And I'm very happy to hear from Don's talk this morning that this seems to be more of an Australia-wide and not so much an international phenomenon, or maybe less international. So face-to-face exams, it's sort of more the gold standard in terms of integrity. The students are actually sitting there, you can see what they're doing. Now, they might do the exam online anyway, in, let's say, a computer lab, or they bring their own laptop. At the very least, you can see what's on their screens. So that's already better than nothing. But of course, if it's still an online exam, but they're right in person, then all the extra workload in crafting good online questions is still there. But at least it's a familiar process. We all know how to do that. But there are some universities that have to cater to remote students. So whether these are students who are stuck overseas, or because they just have a cohort of a lot of international students and they don't require them to come to campus, and they make a lot of money off these students, so you're going to have to cater to them. So that's been an issue that I've seen as well. Right, so that's the problems. Here's the solution. Okay, well, joking aside, this looks a little bit like a marketing pitch. Part of that is because I need to do something like this for my on-prime program. So I just want to introduce the system called Squid, and it consists of 4 components. So the first component, it's the one I'm going to be spending most of the time on, actually. That's the original Squid, and it's a way of creating question pools using Python or Sage. And then the next component would be, this has not been implemented at all. So this is very much work in progress. The Python pools would be a place. One of the reasons I want to show this to you today is I hope that other people will adopt this and start crafting questions in Squid that can then be shared out amongst people, because having already made questions that have already been tested on other people's students is really very valuable. Squid Inc. is a system that takes existing question pools and assembles them into a final quiz. This quiz can be uploaded to your learning management system, or it can be printed as a paper quiz. And then if you use printed quizzes, then the 4th Squid division is the bit that then scans the resulting papers and uploads the results and analyzes them and so on. Okay, so the advantages, well, hopefully a reduced workload. So once, assuming the question pools have already been created, then it's actually very, very quick. I've been using it. I've been teaching a course called Maths 1120 at the University of Newcastle. It's the first year, second semester calculus course for most of our students. Most of them are engineering students. And it literally takes me minutes to set a big mid-semester test. I just click on pools and say, this one, this one, this one. I click a button and I get a PDF file that I can print. It's reusable because each test paper is randomized. I've actually had it so that every single student writes a different paper. That means you can keep reusing them. It also means you can easily make a practice exam for the students and so on. The workflow, once this is properly developed and not as clunky as it is right now, it'll be quite a streamlined workflow, and everything runs in one system, and the results then get reported straight into the LMS. Now, LMS, in my case, it means Canvas. It's what we use in Newcastle. I haven't coded anything for Moodle yet because I've never used Moodle, but I hope that will work as well. Some flexibility here, like I said, when you create a test with this, you can either upload it or print it or both. So if you've got 5 students who are stuck overseas and 195 students who are sitting in front of you, it's okay. Those 5 students can then maybe write the quiz in Canvas and the others write it on paper. But then whether that's really fair is, of course, a bit more of a tricky issue. This can also lead to improved quality, in particular if people start sharing good question pools, and one eventually eliminates the ones that aren't so good and keeps the ones that are good, and you can maybe gather some statistics on each question, how good it actually is on each pool. The other advantage, so Squid programmatically creates pools, but it stores them as a list of questions that then get uploaded or printed or whatever. And what this means is you don't have to program it in such a way that every output is an equally difficult question. You can just slap something together and you get, say, 50 variants, and you throw half of them away because you don't like them, you keep the other half. So you can, once the variant's being created, you can just select the ones you want to keep. So that I find saved me a lot of time. And then also the Squid Vision bit where you scan the results and so on, that can eliminate the whole, you're typing in scores into an Excel sheet, and if you enter a score in the wrong row, then it's a problem and so on. You can eliminate that, hopefully. So just very briefly, so the Squid Inc. part, don't worry about what's exactly on the screen. These are just 2 screenshots. If I have time at the end, I can actually show this to you in action. So what you can see, I might have pointed a few things. So here's a bunch of questions. So this actually is our final exam for Maths 1120 that's a few weeks ago. I'll show you question 1 and 2 and question 12. The only ones you can see are very long thing if I show you everything. So, for example, the last question here, you can't see it, it's very small text, but it's here the 2 by 2 matrix, so the question find all corresponding eigenvectors and eigenvalues. Here's the solution, incidentally, that gets coded along. Should I point on? I must point to the few so the people on Zoom can see. Okay, I can't even read it on the screen. Oh, that doesn't help because my pointer doesn't show up. But sorry, this is PowerPoint has funny slideshow mode and it doesn't show my cursor. Okay, it doesn't matter. The point is that well, you get previews of the first question in each of the pools, and I can move them up and down. I can delete some, I can insert some, and then right at the bottom, I've got some buttons that I've put for create me 200 variants of this, or create me 5 variants, or just 1 variant. The final exam, actually, every student wrote the same variant because luckily they were face-to-face in an invigilated exam, and we were quite happy with that. Okay, so the Squid Python library, here's the QR code again, and I've typed the, or pasted, I should say, the actual URL there as well. So this just runs in Binder. Binder is a service that lets you run things like Jupyter notebooks and so on in the browser, so nothing needs to be installed on your computer. You need to click on that. The only problem is if you click on that now, it'll probably take a few minutes to actually boot up because it's a fair amount of work. But instead, what I can do is I can show you how it looks online. Sorry about that. And we're back in business. Okay, so here we are. This is what you will get, or what you will see once Binder has warmed up and is showing you the actual worksheet. So this is a Jupyter notebook, which is an interactive notebook environment which you can run Python code or other programming languages. So this one's running Python at the moment. So here just give you a little bit of information of what Squid is all about. And I just want to draw your attention to this thing. If you have comments or you're in any way interested, and you have managed to actually run this thing on Binder, then you'll get this link here, which is a link to a survey. And on the survey, you can register your interest and say what features you would like to see in Squid and so on. So let's start with a really, really simple example. So I've got here, let me make this bigger so it's easier to read. There we go. That's a single code cell. The entire thing here, this is the full program. All it does, okay, the question is incredibly simple. The text is simply compute the sum of 2 numbers, and it's a multiple choice question, and it's made 12 or so variants, and it's just displaying the last 2. So the way it displays it, this obviously is, I mean, this is displaying for your benefit while you're making. This is not how it would look in Canvas naturally. And so it always sorts the multiple choice answers so that the first one is always the correct answer, the last one is always none of these. Obviously, Canvas will then commute those first 4 in some random order, of course. So you can see basically how it is. But that's really, it's a very short piece of code. So I don't think it takes too long. But then again, this question is kind of primitive. So let's make a slightly more complicated one. So this is a question that involves a plot. In Sage, this is actually quicker and easier, but because I'm running Python only, it's a little bit longer. So don't worry about the details. I've defined a function that produces as output a multiple choice question. As inputs, there's some parameters, and you will make a list of these outputs as you vary the parameters, and that's your question pool. So if I run this, I hope it works. Let's see. No, it doesn't work. Question MCQ is not defined. I obviously have not. Oh, I didn't run this. That's why. All right. And now it ought to work. There we go. So here's the question. It comes with its own plot. So the question is classify the critical point at coordinates 1, 2 of the function whose contour plot is shown above. And then you have to say what sort of thing it is. And there's a contour plot. And each variant will have a different plot and a different coordinates maybe and a different function. That's just an example. So that's one. Instead, what I'm going to do is now that I've created the function that creates this question, I can make a list of these things by just varying the different inputs. Just wait for it. There we are. Created 16 variants. And here I can display all of the variants. All right. They look like there's a whole bunch of these things. Right. There's different plots, different functions, and so on. Now, what do you do with such a list of variants? You run this little line of code, and it produces a zip file, which is a QTI file that you can upload straight into Canvas. So I wrote this specifically for my colleagues because they all use Canvas. there is, like I said, there's no Moodle functionality, but there is functionality to do the same thing for Blackboard, because before we switched to Canvas a year ago, we were using Blackboard, and that's where I started. So you get the zip file, you can upload it. And I'm going to scroll through this, but it's just some instructions on how exactly you would then upload it into Canvas. The idea with Canvas is, so this QTI file that I've made, the zip file, it's really just an assessment, and it's got 16 questions, and each question is one variant of this question. So it's not a very interesting test at all. You would delete it as soon as you've uploaded it. But what Canvas also does is every time you upload a quiz, it'll automatically take all the questions and put them into a question pool. And now you can use that question pool. So that's one use of this. Okay, so that was a multiple choice question. Squid can do currently only two types of questions, multiple choice and written answer. So in terms of when you print on paper, that's really the only two you're likely to use. But things like Canvas, for example, Canvas will distinguish between a file upload written answer question and a type stuff into this text box type of written answer question. And that's something I still need to put into Squid. As you can see, it is still very much a work in progress. I'd be keen to find people who want to help working on this, to be dead honest. All right, so let's do this question. This is an example of a written answer question. So once again, this is the code. It's a little bit longish. Most of the code is about messing around with strings, because what you create is simultaneously the question and its answer. It's sort of its model solution, if you like. So in this case, the question says, compute the radius of convergence of the following power series. And of course, the actual numbers showing up in the power series are the ones that vary. And then the solution is written out here. And obviously, the solution will vary along that as well. And the reason the code is a page and a half, or maybe 2 pages, is because, as you can see, that's a lot of string format. I mean, if you're not familiar with Python, this will be quite daunting, which is probably why you would want to use other people's question pools that they've made for you. Okay, but anyway, so this is a written answer question. Also, each of them has a variant number, which here I'm choosing to print. It says there for office use only variant 42. And that helps the people because a written answer question is actually marked by human brains. And then they can look up on in their solution PDF that variant number 42, for example. Or there's a little gimmick that I can't show it to you because I don't have a webcam here, but there's a little gimmick where on paper you point a webcam at the question, it'll recognize which question it is and pop up the correct model solution on the screen for you. So that's actually that was a fun thing to program. It's not as hard as it sounds. Okay, but anyway, so let's create a pool of these radius of convergence questions. So I'm just varying them. So it's just a list of radius of convergence here. I don't know if you can read the text, but here's the function, and you call it with a bunch of parameters. There's 2 parameters, B and C, that I'm choosing to vary here. I say B ranges from 2 to 5, and C also ranges from 2 to 5, and I want B to not equal C. Okay, so I've made this, and now I have this selection wizard. And what it does is it shows me the entire pool. In this case, there's 12 variants, variant number 1 to variant number 11. And it gives me a little bit of a summary information. So the first thing there is you know what, instead of giving me the summary, let me just change the options to question preview, then you can see the actual questions. So what you can do, now that you've created this, you will eyeball this list and you go through here and you find, oh, look, in variant 6, you can cancel, right? There's a 1/4 to the end, and inside the brackets, there's a 2x plus 2. You can cancel out a 2. So this question is a little bit easier than the other variants. So I'm just going to deselect it. I don't want to keep it. And then I can select what I'm going to do with it. For example, export it to Canvas. I export it to Blackboard. I print the marking scheme, so it produces for me a LaTeX file with a marking scheme for all of the variants and so on. Okay. So here's an example. Here's the marking scheme. Open in a new tab. Does it show to me? There you go. So it lists the variants, and there's a page for each, and a little bit of a rubric at the bottom saying how to award points and stuff. Okay, but that's how it works. In fact, this table should be links. You can click on it. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so that's the kind of stuff that it produces. So that's the summary. At the moment, Squid is fundamentally, it's a Python library, and it defines 2 classes, question MCQ and question written. I want to make more, such as maybe numerical entry, and also for the written answer question, I want to be able to distinguish between text box and file upload, just for Canvas. But that's really just the first step. So the next bit, so the Squid Ink and Squid Vision, it already runs to to the extent that my first year students have already experienced it, but it's still not smooth enough that my colleagues use it. So I need to work on this. But here's just a little bit more. I'm not going to go into it now because I realize we have a little bit of time to make up. But for example, at our university, we recently made a switch from Blackboard to Canvas. And most of the Squid functionality I developed while we were still on Blackboard. So I have all the functionality for producing these question pools as output that can be uploaded into Blackboard exists. And in fact, I have lots and lots and lots of Blackboard files. And I don't want to recode them or even revisit the code for them. So instead, there's functionality where you can read in these Blackboard files and convert them straight into Squid quizzes. Or if you prefer, you don't want to monkey around with Python at all, and you just want to write your multiple choice questions or your written answer questions and put all your variants into an Excel file. We've got one row per variant, and the columns say, this is the question, that is the answer, those are wrong answers. Well, you can do that too. Then here's a little bit of code that will do that for you. Now, let me just quickly run these code blocks so that I can actually demonstrate stuff. I run this guy. And here I'm going to load just a CSV file. There's multiple choice question. It just has a few columns, the text, the correct answer, a few wrong answers. So, and here you go. So this is all, this is a very silly question, of course, but it's just to show that you can also just, if that's how you want to work, you can import from a CSV file. Or you could import a bunch of questions from Blackboard. So I'm going to use, let's get rid of that, do this, and run. So here's another example. So this is a question I created 2 years ago. I had made it for Blackboard, and I've now just re-imported it into Squid. So I can, and there's just one last thing. It's an amusing kind of question. So here's a vector. So here's a 2x2 matrix, and there's a list of vectors, and one of those vectors is an eigenvector. Pick the right one. And this is always a fun question I like giving to my students, because the bottom 80% will then do the whole calculation of working out all the eigenvalues and the eigenvectors, and then seeing which of the eigenvectors they got is on my list. The smart students will just multiply the matrix against the 4 options. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out. Someone mentioned about good mental models and that sort of thing. So this would be an example of that. Okay.